Born at Punayur Kalam in Kerala on 31st March 1934 to V.M. Nair and Balamani Amma, one of the most eminent Malayalam poets, Kamla Das started writing fiction in her mother tongue at a very early age under the pseudonym Madhavi Kutti. She was married off at the age of 15 to a man 14 years her senior. She has 3 sons and several grandchildren. According to Dr. Devendra Kohli, Kamla Das's love poems are a critique of male-dominated culture at odds with women's psychological needs. While she empathizes with the rebel, she also recognizes and celebrates her own femininity and her rootedness in her landscape and her matrilineal tradition. A woman of rare courage and strong convictions, she has always lived by those convictions, the most controversial being her conversion to Islam after the death of her husband Madhav Das, a household name in Kerala. She has authored nearly 1500 stories that are contained in over 50 collections, some of which have been translated into nearly 30 Indian and foreign languages. After the publication of Summer in Calcutta in 1965, which heralded the emergence of a major new voice on the Indian English literary scene, Kamla Das has altogether published 5 collections of poetry, 2 story collections, 2 novellas, and a highly controversial autobiography, My Story, in English. Kamla Das has also received various citations, honors and awards for her pioneering work in Kerala and for her writings both in Malayalam and English, including the coveted Sahitya Academy Award. The University of Calicut also recently conferred on her an honorary D.Litt for literature.
I don't know politics, but I know the names of those in power and can repeat them like days of week or names of months, beginning with Nehru. I am Indian, very brown, born in Malabar. I speak 3 languages, write in 2, dream in 1. Don't write in English, they said. English is not your mother tongue. Why not leave me alone, critics, friends, visiting cousins, every one of you? Why not let me speak in any language I like? The language I speak becomes mine. Its distortions, its queernesses, all mine, mine alone. It's half English, half Indian. Funny perhaps, but it is honest. It's as human as I am human. If I had been a loved person, I wouldn't have become a writer. I would have been a happy human being. I would write about the calm. I would write about happiness and a lovely love life. To want to live so that it would be incentive for life. But there is always a new personality. There is regrowth. You know, a wood, you set fire to a forest, but later there will be movement in the undergrowth. You will see worms coming up, erupting from the slushy earth. You will see seeds sprout, become trees. You will see bird nests again. You will see the flowers again. So I believe in that. This circle, when I believe in the impermanence of things, I also believe in the permanence of life.
There is hardly any kind of relationship that she has not dealt with in her fiction, especially women in their various positions and states and relations with men and other women and society in general. Nobody else in Malayalam and perhaps in other Indian languages also has dealt with such intensity and such deep insight these relationships as Kamla Das has done. So her protagonists, mostly female, come from different walks of life. She has a wonderful story, for example, on a child prostitute, a doll for a child prostitute, it is called in English translation, and in Malayalam Rukminikku Pavakutti, which deals with the pangs and the anxieties of a prostitute who was just 11 or 12 years old. And it is this gradual expansion of compassion that that makes Kamla one of the finest and the greatest writers of our time, other than of course her language, which is chiseled, filtered, transparent.
And I just watched the child play, two children play outside the brothel. And then I saw the madam of the house coming from the top of the stairs calling her, Rukmini, because a client had come with a newspaper hiding his face. So she went up. She said, don't shift that. They were playing with a piece of brick, hopscotch. She said, don't shift it, I'll come back. And then she came back. And I thought, how innocent they are. How destroyed they are, destroyed by us. She could be my daughter. When I was about 17, I published a story using that name because I didn't want my grandmother to read the story and get a bit shocked. My grandmother was a Puritan and this was a love story. So I used the name Madhavi Kuti. Madhavi, Madhava's wife, and Kuti because I was only a child. Then I published it and I think it was regarded as a good story, and my mother's uncle, who is a writer who used to be very famous, he praised the story and he said, keep it up. And he said, your pen name is beautiful. And after that there was no stopping me. I would write a story for Mathrubhumi every month. I would get 12 rupees per story. I write about the poor mainly and the disadvantaged. I have written about the hermaphrodites living in Kolivada, Bombay. And my story on a prostitute, child prostitute, was made into a movie in Malayalam called Rukmini by a very able director, K.P. Kumaran. Such people I write about because they don't have, they are voiceless. They scream, but we don't hear their screams. They are screaming from around me, little maid servants who get beaten up, 12-year-olds carrying pails of water. I've seen, they don't even get a salary. I take leave of you, fair city, while tears hide somewhere in my adult eyes, and sadness is silent as a stone in the river's unmoving core. It's goodbye, goodbye, goodbye to slender shapes behind window panes, shut against indiscriminate desire and rain, to yellow moons so long ignored, so long unloved, to the birds flesh hungry circling in the sky with shrill and hostile cries, to the crowd near the sea walking or sitting but always talking, talking, talking. I take leave of you, fair city, keep your tears, your anger and your smile for others, young who come with unjaded eyes, give them your sad-eyed courtesans with tinsel and jasmine in their hair, your marble slabs and morgues, your brittle roadside laughter. It's goodbye, goodbye, goodbye to the silence and the sounds, to streets that I never walked but in dreams, to lips that I never kissed but in dreams, to children lovely as flowers out of me never born. I suppose I began writing because I had some weaknesses in my system. I felt I was weak and vulnerable, and I think that's why we attempt poetry, because we are like, poets are like snails without the shells, terribly vulnerable, so easy to crush. Of course, it's given me a lot of pain. Each poem really born out of pain, which I would like to share. But then you look for that person, the sharer of your pain, and you don't find him anywhere. It's the looking that makes a poet go on writing, the search. And I suppose if you find someone Search is over, poetry is over.
I read A Summer in Calcutta, the first book by Kamla Das, in 1965, and I was really struck by it. Some of the poems have still remained in my mind. Some of them have become classics, like the introduction. I particularly liked the dance of eunuchs, where the imagery was very vibrant and colorful. She wrote very easily, without any rhyme scheme, any particular rhythm, 10 syllables or 8 syllables per line, nothing of the sort. And it was obvious that she had a natural gift. After A Summer in Calcutta, the other books that I read, Descendants, and she wrote collected poems which came out, where she had also poems on the Tamils and their fate in Sri Lanka. So they were more politically oriented, but nothing was as fresh or as fragrant as A Summer in Calcutta. She has remained a steady influence on all the other women poets. No one was as bold as she was to start with, and her shadow can be seen in the poems of our best women writers, Eunice D'Souza, Rukmini Bhai Nair, and all the other women poets who have followed.
For me, the landmark woman Indian poet after independence was definitely Kamla Das. And that is why in my first book of poems, The Hyoid Bone, I wrote a long poem, an extended poem on modern English poets. And note that I called the poem Modern English Poets, not Indian women poets, not Indo-Anglian poets, but modern women poets. And in that poem, I referred to Kamla Das's poetry as the world after summer rain. And it was because in her poetry you had the kind of fresh view of what a woman's predicament is. And this is why I think she was a really important voice. Her voice had a kind of grittiness, a kind of intensity, which was associated with consciousness. I think with a consciousness which cannot be ignored. Kamla Das cannot be ignored.
What is this drink but the April sun, squeezed like an orange in my glass? I sip the fire, I drink and drink again. I am drunk, yes, but on the gold of suns. What noble venom now flows through my veins and fills my mind with unhurried laughter. So I suppose by writing poetry, we are forming a kind of crust over us, over the essence, the essential self. But even then, I think like breaking the back of a cockroach at night, walking, without knowing, people unwittingly crush our backs, crush our egos at night. They walk around crushing us. It's a sad occupation, but I wouldn't choose another.
Kamla Das is a pioneer in Indian English poetry. She broke free from the earlier metaphysical and romantic traditions and gave to Indian English poetry a new lease of life. In her use of imagery, in her use of themes, her protests, her reflections of feminisms in her poetry, it created a new trend that was later followed up by many other poets like Gauri Deshpande. But this new lease of life that she injected into Indian English poetry has often been misinterpreted. She has fallen on the thorns of life, as it were, and bled. Yes, definitely bled. Her poetry is not always erotic. She has been hailed as the queen of erotica, but she has also been hailed as a poetic pilgrim. So her name has really oscillated between wide poles, which shows the genius of her poetry.
When we were children, my brother and always playing on the sands, drawing birds and animals, our great-grandmother said one day, "You see this house of ours, now 400 years old. It's falling to little bits before our very eyes. The walls are cracked and torn and moistened by the rains. The tiles have fallen here and there. The windows whine and groan, and every night the rats come out of holes and scamper past our doors." I want to be a good mother to all the characters in my story. A lot of love flowing into my literature, into poetry, stories.
Madhavi Kuti or Kamla Das has always been a very enigmatic kind of presence and absence, both together within Kerala and outside Kerala. I personally feel that Madhavi Kuti or Kamla Surayya's work is important, very important, precisely because it negotiates the vexed territory of the human mind with great elan. I would say it is important precisely because it somehow is not afraid to look divisions straight in the face. And when I say divisions, I mean divisions within, internecine conflicts, tensions, dichotomies, ambiguities. You find such dichotomies in abundance in her work. And this is new as far as Malayalam literature is concerned. Mid-20th century Malayalam literature, especially short fiction, gets a real break with this kind of a very brave kind of a attempt to deal with the impossible questions of the human soul. This is why I think her work is very important. She could be very local, very culture specific, and at the same time reach out to a broader world. She could be very passionate and at the same time be sort of bristling with fear. There is a typical Kamla Das entity in terms of her poetry.